Hi, I'm Rob Linhart,
I'm Lily Margolis.
and welcome to Hazel's Flight School. Today, we're going to talk about glassware. And you might think, what's the big deal with glassware? I've got a red wine glass, I've got a white wine glass, I've got a champagne flute. Do we even need all of this? And I would have to say up front, honestly, a lot of the time, no. But we are going to take a dive into this, and we are going to talk a little bit about why sometimes the glassware does matter.
Cool. Well, let's start with the champagne flute. I think this is one of the most recognizable pieces of glassware, just because it is so commonly used in celebrations, oftentimes champagne served at restaurants. So why is champagne served in a flute?
There's really only one practical reason to use a tall, narrow flute like this, and that's for show. Champagne has bubbles, sparkling wine has bubbles, and it just showcases that aspect of the wine really nicely. It kind of emphasizes the head or the foam on top. You get these long trains of bubbles kind of running up the glass. It's very pretty, and I love the look, I gotta admit it. It's kind of a really classy look. But strictly speaking, it's not very good for tasting wine, even champagne. It's really hard to get the aromatics to open up. There's a very narrow sort of top to the glass. You can't really get your nose in there. So great for show, lots of fun, but strictly speaking, not really the best to get the most out of the wine when it comes to the flavors and the aromas of the wine.
So what would be a great replacement for a champagne flute if you really want to emphasize the taste and the aromas of the wine?
Well, in this case, a good white wine glass, which can also, by the way, be substituted as a general tasting glass. And in fact, here at Hazel's, this is the white wine glass that we use for tasting all of our wines and even sometimes beer and other products as well. Just a nice sort of round shape, general shape, good size. You don't want to overfill it. Gives you a lot of room to swirl things around, room to get your nose in there, and so on and so forth. Little bit of closure at the top does help to concentrate some of the more delicate aromatics in the wine. So for general use for white wines and just generally for tasting, a good basic white wine glass like this can really get the job done. And we're not that fussy. As professionals, many of the tastings we go to, and we're expected to evaluate these wines on a pretty high level, this is what they're gonna give us. So it can work just fine if you're on a budget, if you're not really that hung up on getting the finest details out of your wine and you just want a good glass, a good basic white wine or tasting glass, it'll get the job done every time.
Awesome. And next we have this little wine glass right here. Tell us about this one.
These cute little guys. So there are many variations on this theme, and you'll go out there in the world and you'll see that. This is a dessert glass or a port wine glass or a sherry glass. And that's often we use for these sweet or fortified wines where a little bit goes a long ways, and so you want a smaller glass. And with these dessert wines and with these fortified wines, generally, they're also aromatically very bold. And we don't have to work that hard at getting them to open up. So sort of unlike the champagne flute, where there can be some more delicate aromatics in there, with these little guys, you're gonna get pretty much everything you need. You whiskey drinkers out there may recognize the general shape of that. It's very reminiscent of a Glencairn glass, which is a classic for tasting whiskeys and scotches, where you've got a little bit of a wider bulb down in the bottom, and then it kind of narrows up a little bit as it gets closer to the top. And that does a really good job of both giving you access to the aromatics, but it concentrates some of those more delicate aromatics and some of those more delicate things in the wine to kind of help give you more of that detail. But generally speaking, yeah, since we're drinking in smaller quantities, ideally, we can use a smaller glass. And they're quite cute, and they do a great job for dessert wines.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next one.
All right.
What kind of glass is this?
That would be considered a Bordeaux glass. And when we think Bordeaux, we're talking specifically here about Bordeaux reds, those big, bold, sometimes full throttle reds that can nevertheless have a tremendous amount of depth and detail and finesse in the aromatics. That's that wonderful thing about Bordeaux that can be so captivating. So what you need here is a glass that has a lot of room to really allow the wine to open up, really get some air in there. Especially young Bordeaux tends to need a lot of air. So you give yourself a lot of space, a lot of volume where you can really swirl that around, really get it going, and then you can just get your nose right in there and really get after what's coming up out of that wine as you've rolled it around in that glass and given it a chance to aerate. So it's almost like, you could almost say it's like a little bit of a self-decanting, if you will, giving that wine an opportunity to open up and air out. And because you have this combination of big, bold aromas and fine, detailed aromas, this kind of gives you the best of both worlds. It kind of narrows up and collects some of that at the top, but gives you a chance to really get in there and take a deep dive. You could also use that glass really for any red wine, especially like Bordeaux, some of the bigger, bolder styles. And here's an example of that, a good, general, useful, everyday red wine glass. So you can see it's not quite as big, not quite as broad at the base, closed down, not really accentuated, but like the white wine glass, it's really a good all-around glass. And in fact, you could use this for whites as well. Just a bit bigger, give you a chance to air out that red wine a little more, wake it up a bit more without breaking the bank. Sometimes these Bordeaux styles can be pretty expensive, but this is a good budget-friendly all-around alternative for most people.
But I'm noticing there is the size difference in the red and white glasses. Is that just because the white generally doesn't need as much exposure to air to really open it up? We don't need to aerate it as much?
That is exactly right. The whites tend to not need that much help, and younger reds in particular need a bit more of that. For tasting purposes, it can also be a bit smaller, a bit easier to handle in tight spaces. Sometimes these tasting rooms get really crowded and you get in there. And the idea here is that you're tasting. So of course, we're not gonna be filling it up all the way. So we wouldn't have to, if we're filling it up, we wouldn't have to swirl it around quite so much if it's a white wine. If we're tasting and we're just getting little bits in there, you still have plenty of room to swirl that around and get your nose in there. Yeah.
Totally.
Good question.
Well, let's move on to a very popular and yet unpopular glass.
Yeah.
The stemless wine glass.
The stemless wine glass.
How do you feel about this, Rob?
Don't love it. The fact of the matter is that especially for white wine and also for better reds that want to be at a cooler temperature, cellar temperature, let's say 50 degrees, somewhere in that range, a little bit cool, white wines, sparkling wines that are best served chilled, if not downright cold. It's attractive, it's fun, it's maneuverable, it's not so fragile as a stem glass, but if you're holding that wine in that glass in your hand, you very much run the risk of kind of warming it up a bit too much and kind of taking that wine out of its best drinking window. On the flip side, I would say, however, as a brandy snifter, or sometimes you might want to warm up a port wine, this might actually be a useful glass to do that in. Warming up your port a little bit to kind of bring out the aromatics, bring up the alcohol. I could see it being used for that. But for general use, by and large, for most wines, I would steer away from the stemless style.
Okay. The only glass we haven't discussed so far.
The Burgundy glass. There are a lot of variations on this theme. Some are going to have a flatter base and a more aggressive narrowing. Some of them are going to be, smaller, bigger, this sort of shape. The key elements to this wine are Burgundy wines in general, and we're talking about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay here, but especially Pinot Noir. When they're young and in the Burgundy style, like the Bordeaux glass, they need a lot of air. So you're gonna have a lot more swirling. Now we're really talking about decanting this thing, really trying to maximize what comes out of that delicate, finessed Burgundy. and then concentrating those delicate aromas as you get up to the top of the nose so you can pick that all up. So Burgundy, as many of you know, can be a hard wine to taste. It can be challenging precisely because there can be so much going on in that wine, and you're hard to get that out of the, you're trying to figure out where is all this detail everybody talks about. So whereas in a lot of cases a basic white, a basic red, even a Bordeaux glass you can use for so many different wines, this is one of those glasses that I really do encourage you, if you can find a good and expensive example, go with it, because here it really can make a big difference in how you experience Pinot Noir in general, Burgundy in particular, and I would also say Chardonnay and delicate whites can also benefit quite a bit from this style of glass.
I'm also noticing on both the Bordeaux and the Burgundy glass, these two glasses have much thinner stems, the walls of the glasses are much thinner. Why is that, and does that make a difference in the wine tasting experience?
By and large, that's just style. This thick stem here, you're holding the wine by the stem. It's just a question of, are you gonna crack it in your hands? Are you gonna set it down hard and break it? The glasses that I use at home for my wines, I do have some in this style, but generally you gotta pay a bit to get these very fine, very finely done, thin-walled glass. For my part, I don't think it's particularly important. You obviously don't want a great big chunky beer glass, kind of thick glass. But I think by and large, the thickness of the glass, the thickness or thinness of the stem, it's more of a style thing than anything else. Now, if you go out there and you take a deep dive into this, you will see specialized wine glasses for every kind of wine that's out there. Nebbiolo glasses that have these weird little wings, and different variations again on all these themes. But when you see a Bordeaux glass, when you see a Burgundy glass, when you see a white wine glass, you'll have a general idea about basically what you're going for in terms of how to best experience the wine that goes in that glass. That's our quick little dive into wine glasses and what they're good for.
Thanks for flying with us today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and ask your questions in the comments. Today's trivia question is, which of these glasses is the best for tasting champagne? Be the first person to correctly answer this question in the video comments and win a $10 Hazel's gift card.